What if everything you've been told about law school just changed overnight? Florida drops the ABA requirement, Texas drops the ABA requirement, and suddenly there are tons of questions on the LSAT forums asking, does the LSAT even matter anymore? Do I still need to go to an ABA accredited law school? And is law school about to get cheaper, faster, or easier? Now, here's the truth, and I know this won't sound as exciting as the headlines, but this is not the earthquake that people think it is. And if you react to it emotionally instead of strategically, you could make one of the most expensive mistakes of your life. And so today, I want to slow this down just a bit and walk you through three things. First, what actually changed. Second, what did not change at all. And third, why being early here is far riskier than being late, because law is not a profession that rewards you for getting in early. It rewards you for being conservative, being averse to risk, and for choosing paths that you already know to work. Now, here is the precise change without the clickbait. Florida and Texas, through their state Supreme Courts, have now removed the rule that you must graduate from an ABA accredited law school in order to sit for the bar in those states. That is it. Now, notice what that sentence does not say. It does not say that ABA accredited degrees are suddenly less valuable, or that top law schools are changing their admission standards, or that employers are updating their hiring filters, or that the LSAT is obsolete. Of course, it is not, if only it were that simple. All that happened is this: the monopoly was loosened in theory so that other accreditors could exist in the future. Not today, not this cycle, and there's no actual replacement in place. There is currently no new accreditor, there is no alternative system, no proven pipeline, just permission. And that's not the same thing as having a new infrastructure. The first mistake I'm already seeing students make is treating these headlines like it's some kind of green light to take a shortcut with your legal education. And law is not the profession for taking shortcuts. We want to be very clear about what you are investing in when you pursue law school. You're not just buying classes or a JD, you are trading 3 full years of your life, 6 figures of tuition plus living expenses, and your geographic flexibility, all for a credential that will open doors. So the real question is not, can I technically become a lawyer some other way? The real question is, what doors will still be open to me after I pursue law school? And that's where accreditation from the American Bar Association still matters enormously. For several decades now, accreditation by the American Bar Association has functioned as a national signal of trust. Nobody's saying it's perfect or it's pure, but it is widely understood. It tells everybody out there who might hire you, including judges, law firms, clerkship committees, other state bars, that one single baseline of quality has been met. And of course, it's not perfect. That baseline could certainly be improved. And of course, they could also bring down the costs significantly, but replacing a national standard with nothing yet is not progress for you as the consumer. It is a vacuum. And vacuums get filled slowly when you're dealing with institutions as bureaucratic as law school accrediting bodies. And in the meantime, you might pay real costs in the short term. Now, every big structural change will, of course, facilitate the entrance of early adopters. And if you are the early adopter, you're going to pay higher tuition, of course, in actual money, in risk, and potential regret. Now, if there is some new accreditor who eventually emerges, and that's a big if, someone's going to be in the first graduating class. And unfortunately, because it is new, that class is not going to have any alumni network. It's not going to have any familiarity with employers. And of course, there won't be any precedent or historical bar passage data. And that means you are at risk when it comes to paying student loans. So you don't want to be explaining 5 years from now why your degree is technically valid, but practically, unfortunately, somewhat limiting, especially when the traditional path of going to an ABA accredited law school is still available and it's still the main game in town. Now, I know the LSAT is unpopular, nobody wants to take it, but for that reason, misinformation unfortunately spreads faster when it comes to the LSAT being required or not to that question. And so, if you are applying to ABA accredited law schools, which still includes virtually every reputable school, and there are nearly 200 of them in the United States, nothing changes for you. Admissions committees still rely on the LSAT, merit scholarships are still heavily LSAT driven, and the rankings, I'm talking US News here, they still reward LSAT medians. And so, if anything, uncertainty makes strong signals like your LSAT score more valuable rather than less. Because when institutions feel instability, they don't abandon metrics, they cling to the ones that they trust. And so, if you were hoping that these headlines meant you could aim lower, you could prep less, you could take the easy way out and skip the LSAT entirely, I'm sorry to tell you, that's not the best path forward, and that hope is unfortunately misplaced. The good news, though, is that the LSAT remains the single biggest lever you control in this process when it comes to getting into better law schools, getting more scholarship money, or both. And I know you're thinking about the question of prestige. Prestige does not disappear overnight because of some court order from a single state or two. It erodes slowly over several decades, if it erodes at all. Law is a conservative profession in the literal sense. I don't mean political here. I just mean they value precedent, they value hierarchy, they value longevity, they value predictability. That's why top law schools won't drop accreditation from the American Bar Association anytime soon. Mid-tier schools can't afford to. And so that leaves you with the bottom ranked schools, which you probably don't want to go to anyway because they have the worst employment outcomes and the worst bar passage rates. And employers certainly are not going to gamble on some new unfamiliar credential. And even the states making these changes, I'm talking here Florida and Texas, they're quietly acknowledging this by saying they still care about bar passage rates and they still care about employment outcomes, which raises an obvious question. If the standards are basically the same, why change the label? I think it just comes down to politics. It comes down to virtue signaling. And politics aside, the answer for you as a student is pretty simple. Follow the signal that the market actually rewards because you are the one investing your time, your money. Law school is a six-figure gamble. When you consider an average cost of attendance of roughly $84,000 per year, multiply that by 3, it's $250,000. And the risk that almost no one talks about enough is that, let's say you attend a non-ABA accredited law school that's approved only in one state. What happens if your spouse gets a job elsewhere? What happens if your parents have a health issue and need you in another state? What happens if your practice area changes? You might end up moving. Can you predict with absolute certainty that sometime in the next 40 years, you might not relocate to a different state where your law degree is no longer transferable because you didn't go to an ABA approved law school? Of course, lawyers move, lives change, and going to an ABA approved law school has historically made it possible for you to move and still port your JD over to a different state. But if you remove that safety net, that means you are betting that your future self will never need flexibility, and that is a pretty risky bet. And of course, the recent changes with Florida and Texas could possibly lead to innovation longer term. They could pressure accreditors to streamline things, simplify things, bring down the cost. But those are long-term systemic effects. They don't help you applying to law school in the next year or two. And the incentives when it comes to legal education have not shifted in any meaningful way yet. ABA accredited law schools are still dominating hiring, clerkships, federal opportunities, and of course the LSAT is still the path to getting into the best law school possible and getting as much scholarship money as possible. And so If you are in a position where you are choosing between a respected ABA accredited law school and some cheaper, untested alternative with uncertain outcomes, you're making a pretty risky gamble. And those savings could vanish fast if you struggle to pass the bar. You are then limiting your job options, you're getting screened out automatically, and law school is expensive no matter where you go. The real cost is not your tuition, it is the opportunity cost. And so the calm, rational move for you, if you're applying the next couple of years, is to double down on what you can control, which means maximizing your LSAT, targeting strong, established schools, and thinking long term, not in terms of politics. Because the people who will be least affected by these changes are the ones who have already positioned themselves well. Of course, someone else can be the first to experiment. Someone else is going to be the one to learn the hard way, but there is no prize for being first here. There's no benefit for you being the guinea pig. What Florida and Texas have done here is largely a symbolic move, but a symbolic move does not forgive your debt. They're not going to pay your tuition for you. And the lack of transferability across state lines is a big gamble. And so until the hiring market changes its behavior, the smart move remains the same. You want to take the LSAT seriously, aim for the best school you can get into with as much scholarship money as possible, and don't gamble 3 years of your life. Now, if you'd like my help getting the highest possible LSAT score for the best possible law school admissions outcomes, the best possible scholarships as well when it comes to getting merit aid, maybe even a full ride to law school, I'm offering free LSAT tutoring lessons for everybody watching this now or later. The link is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below this video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and Instagram as well. That is an open offer, free LSAT tutoring, no obligation, free video call one-on-one with me personally. Again, the link is unpluggedprep.com/start. Happy to help you out, talk through your situation, help you craft your plan of attack whenever you're taking the LSAT, whether it's in February, April, June, or beyond. And I run these lives every single weekday, same time, same place, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central, 11 Pacific, here on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, wherever you're watching this. I see a ton of questions coming into the chat here. Happy to get to as many of those as I possibly can. I see some questions coming in here. Abby's asking, is the LSAT harder than the practice tests? Well, it depends which practice tests you're talking about here. So LSAC, the Law School Admission Council, has released 59 numbered exams in the new LSAT format. They are numbered 101 to 159. Then there are several drill sets and individual sections available to you as well. And so all of those practice tests are real previously administered exams. And so if you take one of those, that should be pretty much the same as the one you're going to take on your official LSAT. Now, the LSAT has evolved over time, so more recent practice tests are more relevant, meaning that the practice tests in the 150s are going to be more useful and more relevant and possibly harder than LSATs numbered 101, 102, 103, and so on. So if you want the best indication of where you stand, look at the newer practice tests, but they are meant to be a reasonable indication of the LSAT you will take yourself. So well worth using those real practice tests, but don't use any of the fake practice tests from those books on Amazon that were largely AI generated. Give those to your worst enemy. They're full of mistakes, totally unrealistic, definitely not worth your time. Use the real, actual, official LSATs published by LSAC, available to you in LSAC's Law Hub platform. You get 4 of those available for free. Then the other 55 or so you get with your $120 per year Law Hub Advantage subscription. Well worth the investment. Angelina's asking, do law schools consider previous LSAT scores you've received, regardless of a higher score later? So law schools will see all LSAT scores on your report, but they only consider the highest for admissions purposes. And so let's say that you took the LSAT and you scored a 150, you retake it, and you score a 170. They'll see the 150, but the 170 is what counts. And if you took it and got a 170, retook and you got a 150, meaning your score dropped, the higher score is still what counts. So really, there is no downside to retaking the LSAT. If you do better, great. If you don't, no big deal. And the LSAT is offered 8 times per year. Coming up, we've got the February LSAT in about 3 weeks. Then we've got April in about 3 months. Then we have June in about 5 months. And then, of course, they'll also offer it in the second half of the year, but they've not yet released those LSAT test dates. But I recommend that everybody retake the LSAT because there's no downside. If you do better, great. If not, no big deal. They don't average multiple scores. They only take the highest score on record. And by the way, folks, if you missed anything, these lives are all recorded on the YouTube channel through the link in my bio on TikTok. The LSAT Unplugged YouTube channel, we have the recordings of all the previous lives I've ever done, all the videos on there going over every LSAT topic. So feel free to dive over there for more. Carly's asking, how much do they look at LSAT scores? They look at them a lot. So your LSAT score is the biggest factor in law school admissions, meaning it is the main determinant of your chances for getting into law school. Law school admissions is determined by your LSAT score, your GPA, then everything else, your application essays being a distant third factor, but LSAT first and foremost. Neither either's asking, what books do you recommend to study for the LSAT? So I'll answer with a nod to your username, meaning neither or none of them. So don't use books to study for the LSAT at all. Because the LSAT is online now, I recommend practicing like it's going to be on game day. So use the official LSAT practice tests, but get the digital ones on LSAC's Law Hub platform. The old LSAT books on Amazon, a lot of them are in the old format with logic games, which is severely outdated. There have not been any logic games on the LSAT for over a year and a half now. You don't want to be using potentially outdated materials. Get Law Hub Advantage, and then if you're looking for more guidance, you might want to consider more digital support online. For example, at LSAT Unplugged, we offer private one-on-one LSAT coaching. We offer small group classes via Zoom, on-demand video courses, custom study plans, semi-private coaching as well. If you want to talk through the prep options available to you and craft a personal plan of attack, you can do so through the link in my bio. The link is unpluggedprep.com/start. Link is below this video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok as well. Iris Taylor's asking, how much of an impact does your LSAT score play if your GPA is lower? So the LSAT is the biggest factor in law school admissions, regardless of whether your GPA is high or low. If your GPA is low, that should give you more fuel, more reason to push for a higher LSAT score to compensate for a relatively lower GPA. That would make you a so-called splitter applicant, high LSAT, low GPA. Of course, it's possible to be the reverse with a high GPA, low LSAT, but in my view, there's no reason to be a reverse splitter, no reason to have a high GPA, low LSAT, because you can retake the LSAT and get a high LSAT, then you'd have both a high LSAT, a high GPA to put you into an optimal position for admissions. Of course, it's a lot easier to retake the LSAT than to retake all of your undergrad classes and try to boost your GPA that way. To redo 120 credits, retake every class is a lot of work and would take a couple of years most likely, but in contrast, it could take you just another month or two of studying for an LSAT retake to boost up your score there. Rach is asking, I've studied for almost 600 hours in 6 months and scored really bad, got a 146. Should I take a break? So I'm just doing some math here. Let's say you did 600 hours in 6 months, 100 hours per month. That works out to 25 hours per week, works out to roughly 4 hours a day. 4 hours a day is a pretty good amount of studying. Could you have done slightly more? Maybe, but I don't want you to burn out. I think it's worth taking a day or two off per week on average. I might want to look at how are you studying, because 4 hours a day isn't nothing. That's a fairly significant amount of time over the course of 6 months. So I wonder if you're studying as efficiently as you could be. In other words, is there a way for you to work smarter rather than just working harder? Because you're clearly working hard. The question is, are you studying as effectively as possible? A lot of students fall into one of two camps. They either take practice test after practice test relentlessly, measuring their results, being happy or sad about those results, and then moving on. Or on the flip side, They drill questions by type, but never take practice tests. So I'm curious, Rach, which position are you in, or are you doing something else altogether? You don't want to do nothing but drill questions because it's not enough to drill them. You got to take them under test day conditions. Test day is not a drill. You also don't want to just take practice tests without developing a strong foundation. So the best approach is probably some sort of hybrid of the two, where you build a strong foundation, do some drilling, and also take several practice tests. I see you're saying you've done 17 practice tests and lots of drills. I'm wondering what your review process looks like. This might be beyond the scope of a live back and forth here right now. And so if you want to talk through your situation, feel free to please book that free LSAT tutoring lesson with me through the link in my bio, and we can talk through your personal situation, your particulars, help you craft a better plan of attack. But I do think that you probably deserve a break at this stage because you've been working fairly hard. Mr. Nice Guy's asking, any advice on how to get scholarships for law school? I mean, the best way to get a scholarship is to apply to a school with your numbers being above their medians. If your LSAT's above the medians, if your GPA is above the medians, they're going to be increasingly likely to give you scholarships to attract you to their school in particular because you're going to boost their standing in the rankings. It's as simple as that. So a stronger application with stronger numbers will put you in the optimal position. Braden's asking, hypothetical question, do the accreditation changes, we're talking here back to Florida and Texas, for example, do those mean that an undergrad student could possibly prep for and pass the bar exam? Maybe. It still remains to be seen exactly what this alternative state-based accreditation process would look like. That's still a very open question. If we look at the California example, which has been, I think, around for decades, the path that Kim Kardashian took, for example, circumventing going to law school directly, instead taking more of an apprenticeship route, where you do some sort of apprenticeship under the supervision of an attorney. You study for the bar exam independently. You still got to log apprenticeship hours. That might be a way for you to prep for, take, and pass the bar exam without going to law school, but that's still a very unique little taken path, and that might limit you to only practicing in that particular state. So you can already do that in California. You've been able to do it for decades, I think. And of course, Kim Kardashian herself has taken that path in California. But I think the Florida and Texas announcements are so new, we don't really know what exactly the alternate path is going to look like. And if anything, that might just be saying they're going to take their own path to accrediting law schools, rather than saying you can become an attorney without going to law school. So lots of unanswered questions here. If you want to skip law school, you might just want to go to California. But then, of course, the problem is that you would then be limited to California practice only, again, with those geographic constraints. So it's a little bit of a risky path, definitely not for everybody. And sometimes the more straightforward, simpler path is just doing things the way the majority of people do them, because that is leading to the pipelines for the best jobs available. Just scanning through here for more questions coming in. Thanks for all the great questions, because I see a ton of them here. Jordan's asking, thoughts on applying with a 172 LSAT and a 3.9 GPA? That makes for a pretty strong application. I mean, even for the top 14 law schools, their GPA medians are all around a 3.9, so you're good on that metric. The 172 LSAT puts you right in the middle of their LSAT medians, which are roughly 170 to 174. So if you actually have a 172 LSAT and a 3.9 GPA, you're going to get into some great law schools. If you want to maximize your acceptances, you might want to go for an LSAT retake, go for a 175 plus for the best outcomes, but you're still in pretty good shape. Mike is asking, what do you think of Juris Masters programs? I'm guessing in contrast to Juris Doctor programs, meaning a JD. So getting a master's in law versus getting a JD. I think these master's in law programs are a little bit of a scam, to be frank, because I'm not really sure what jobs they actually accredit you for or prepare you for. In other words, it's like having a JD light, like having a JD, but not actually, meaning you're studying a lot of law-related topics, but you're not actually getting a law degree. So you're not going to be able to practice law. It's kind of like paralegal plus, but what employers are looking for that kind of degree? I feel like these programs are really just cash grabs on the part of universities to get some tuition revenue from people who aren't taking the LSAT and not going to law school, but still want to get some law-related education. The tuitions are high, but I would be very skeptical of those kinds of programs and ask them some tough, skeptical questions when it comes to what actual jobs they are preparing you for and what pipelines they have to employment upon graduation. In other words, what return are you going to get on your investment in that kind of master's program? Ethan is asking, I scored a 158 on my first LSAT and a 168 on my second with a 3.9 GPA. Should I retake? I'm aiming for big law. Well, what kinds of law schools do you want to go to? I mean, and first off, congrats on your 10-point LSAT increase. That's pretty good. Would love to help you get another 5-10 points more on your LSAT if you were to decide to retake. If you want to go into big law, do you want to go to a top 14 or a top 30 law school? You're 2 points short of a 170, and law schools themselves are susceptible to the optical difference of a 168 versus a 170. So I think that honestly, you might want to retake just to maximize your odds of getting into a more prestigious law school if big law truly is what you want to do. And if you'd like my help preparing for that retake, if you're aiming for the LSAT in February or April or beyond, like I've mentioned, I'm offering free LSAT tutoring for everybody watching this now or later. The link is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below this video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, and in my bio on TikTok as well. Open offer to everybody watching this now or later. Elle is asking, is it too late to apply to law school by the end of January? No, it's not too late. Pretty much every single law school in the US will take the results of the January LSAT for this cycle, and most of them will take the results of the February LSAT as well. And so the January LSAT's not too late. The February LSAT's also not too late. April is a little bit late for this cycle. Some schools will take it, some won't. If you're looking at April or June, you might be better off just applying in the fall to start law school in fall of 2027 for the best outcomes. At that point, there's more scholarship money available. It's a bit easier to get in when you apply early. But of course, better to apply later with a higher LSAT than earlier with a lower LSAT. And so for those of you who really want to go to law school this fall, who feel like you might need a bit more time to study for the LSAT, taking it in February and maybe even taking April is totally fine. But if you are taking April, talk to law schools, make sure they will still accept those results. Char's asking, do you think applying with a 155 LSAT score is worth it, or should I retake? In my personal opinion, there's no law school worth going to that will take you with a 155 LSAT. The better law schools won't accept you, and the lower ranked schools won't give you scholarship money even if they do take you. But in my view, the trade-off of going to a lower ranked school is in exchange for getting more scholarship money. And so if you were to get a 165 LSAT rather than a 155 LSAT, you're getting into better law schools or getting more scholarship money from the lower ranked schools, or both. And so my optimal path for you would either be to get a higher LSAT so that you can go to a more prestigious school, or get into a lower ranked school but also have more scholarship negotiation leverage. But a 155 will get you neither of those, and so I would suggest retaking. And for the questions here about various different LSAT, various different law schools like Suffolk or New York Law School or Rutgers, folks basically asking me to chance them. There are 200 ABA approved law schools. I don't know all of their latest LSAT and GPA medians off the top of my head, but you can look up that data for yourself. If you were to look at the ABA 509 reports for any of these law schools, you'll be able to see their most recent published LSAT medians, their most recent published GPA medians, and you'll be in a better position to predict your own chances of getting in. But like I said, in terms of like getting into Rutgers Law with a 156 LSAT might get you in, but what kind of scholarship money are you getting? If you were to retake the LSAT and boost up your score by 10 points, you could then leverage that score for getting tens of thousands of dollars off on your tuition. So just by retaking the LSAT, even if you retook it in April, you come back to Rutgers and you say, I know you took me, but how about giving me some money now that I got a higher LSAT? Don't say it that way, of course, but you'll have more leverage to get that discount on your tuition. It could save you $30,000 over the course of 3 years or even more potentially. So retaking the LSAT, getting a higher score, leveraging that score for scholarships, it could be the easiest money that you'll ever make. Mr. Nice is asking me what was my LSAT score. So I started off with a cold diagnostic of a 152. Took me an entire year of beating my head against the wall, but I ultimately ended up with a 175 on LSAT test day. If I'd done it properly, I could have knocked it out in less than half the time, just a couple months probably, because the LSAT's a test of pattern recognition. And so if you can spot the tricks and traps, you can avoid them. It all comes down to understanding how the test makers think and seeing it from their perspective. And once you do that, everything changes. And that approach has worked for over 10,000 of my students over the past 20 years. And so if you want my help boosting up your LSAT score, learning from my mistakes, you can book that free LSAT tutoring with me, private one-on-one session via Zoom video. The link is below this video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, and in my bio on TikTok as well. Happy to meet with you personally and talk you through your situation, help you craft your plan of attack. Charisma Boss is asking, what is the most efficient way to study for the LSAT or prepare for the LSAT? So when we meet, we could talk through this, of course, in more depth, but we craft a personalized study plan for every single one of our students in our programs. The framework we use is the LASER approach to LSAT prep. LASER is an acronym standing for Learning, Accuracy, Sections, Exams, and Review, and it is the cornerstone of my courses and my coaching programs. The way that it works is that we build a strong foundation in the different sections and the different question types. That is the L for learning in the LASER approach. That could involve going through course lesson videos, joining small group sessions via Zoom, or we could even walk you through it personally one-on-one, giving you proficiency and familiarity in the different sections and the different question types. Then we move into A for accuracy, drilling questions by type to better understand the proper perspective from which to view each section and each question type. Then we have S for individual sections, working on pacing and time management, how you allocate your time over the course of the section. Then we have E for exams and endurance, doing full-length timed practice tests to better simulate test day conditions so that test day itself will be like just another run-through. And then we have R for review. We use the Socratic review method framework, where we dig into exactly what questions you're getting wrong and why, so that we can help you avoid making that same mistake the next time around. And so if you want to talk through your personal plan of attack, looking at where you're currently scoring, what your goal score is, what your time frame is between now and your test date, what your goal law schools are that you want to attend, you can book that free LSAT tutoring with me, and we could talk through the particulars. Open offer for everybody, whether you're taking this in LSAT in February or April or June. There is still time for you to improve on the LSAT, even if you're taking it in February. If you're taking it in February, less than a month away, we'll take a more intensive boot camp style approach with live coaching 7 days a week. If you're taking it in April or June, where you've got 3-5 months or more, we could take a more slow and steady approach. Of course, the slow and steady is preferable. Always better to plan ahead if you can. But if you're on a shorter time frame, of course, we can work with that as well. Narges is asking, do you think I can do law school and have a full-time job? So if you're going to law school full-time, they typically will not allow you to work simultaneously because they don't want you to tank your law school GPA, and law school is demanding enough that you don't want to try to work full-time simultaneously. But if you go to law school in a part-time program where you're doing evenings or weekends maybe, then they will allow you to work. But it is really tough to do law school and work at the same time, even if you're going to law school part-time. So Of course, your financial reality may require that you work, but it's preferable to avoid working during law school if you can. Just scanning through here for other questions coming in. Braun is asking, I was prep testing at 168 to 173 prior to my last attempt, and I scored a 164. I'm aiming for a 173 or higher. When should I register? So, Braun, if I understand correctly, your practice test range was high 160s to low 170s, but then your actual test score was a low 160s, being a 164. So you dropped and scored below even the low end of your range. And unfortunately, this sort of thing is all too common. Students typically drop 5 to 8 points from their practice tests to the actual exam due to not properly simulating test day conditions, nerves, anxiety, what have you. And so that's part of why we want to make sure that you are fully and properly simulating test day conditions during all of your practice tests so that you have a better, more accurate indication of what test day itself will actually be like and how you'll actually do. We also want you taking at least 10 to 12 practice tests under real test day conditions so that test day itself feels like just another run through and you've done it all before. You might also want to just raise your baseline so that even if you do drop, you're still safely and securely at that 173 plus range. Now, to your question of when should you register for the LSAT, I would say ideally when your practice test range is higher and your PT average is a 173 plus, not that you're simply scoring 173 on your best day. So we've got to raise your baseline, work on your weak areas, drill them by type, have you take more practice tests, give you a structured study plan, laying out exactly what to do every single day from now till the test. And so if you want to talk through what that plan could look like to get you reliably and consistently into the 173 plus range, of course, feel free to book that free tutoring with me and we could talk through your particulars. Duncan's asking, should I expect a comparative passage on reading comp for the February LSAT? So for those who aren't aware, on the January LSAT, roughly 1 week ago, LSAC threw a bit of a curveball, and for the first time in almost 20 years, they did not include a comparative reading passage on the reading comp section for some people. Some people got the comparative or dual passage, some people did not. They since apologized for failing to notify people in advance of that change. And what this means going forward is that you may or may not get a comparative passage in reading comp on your LSAT going forward. You might get it, you might not. So be ready for anything. Make sure that you know how to do a comparative passage if you were to come across one, but also don't be surprised if they only give you 4 single passages instead. So could go either way. At least you are forewarned and you know that you may or may not get one, so you won't be thrown for a loop. Mikey's asking, when I drill, I get so many questions right in a row, mostly level 3s. I did a practice test and I got a 136. Why? Well, test day is not a drill. So it's a very different thing to drill questions by type than it is to do a full exam. When you are drilling questions, you're doing them bite-sized, one at a time, maybe not even on a computer, maybe it's on your phone, for example. And so you're getting the immediate feedback and the dopamine hit of seeing whether you got it right or wrong, but you're doing them one by one here and there. It is a very different thing to do 100 LSAT questions in one sitting with no feedback. The endurance factor is real. The timing factor is also real because the LSAT is strictly timed. You're doing 35 minutes of 25 questions back to back with no break. You're doing 2 sections, in fact, back to back with no break. You then only get 1 10-minute break, and you're doing 2 more sections back to back. And so when you drill, you are removing the time constraint. You're removing the pacing factor. You're also removing the endurance factor as well. And so in a way, drilling is an artificial, unrealistic environment and not representative of what test day is going to be like. Kind of like how sprinting 50 meters is very different than running a marathon. You could say a marathon is just a lot of 50-meter sprints chained together, but the quantity has a quality of its own, right? It's a very different, radically different experience to do a full marathon or to do 100 questions over the course of 2.5 hours. So you've got to practice like it's going to be on game day. The drilling is not representative of test day. And so I would encourage you, as test day approaches, do fewer drills and do a lot more practice tests. One thing that we do for our students is we craft study plans where we make sure that you are transitioning from the drilling to the timed sections to work on pacing, to the full exams to work on your endurance. So we're giving you the accountability and the structure to make sure that you are not avoiding or procrastinating the practice tests. You got to get there sooner rather than later. Ideally, you want to do at least 10 or 12 of those. And if you're doing one a week, it would take you nearly 3 months to do a dozen practice tests. If you're doing 2 a week, it would take you a month and a half. So you've got to start doing those earlier rather than later. If you're taking the LSAT in February, hopefully you've already been doing a practice test or 2 per week. If you're taking the LSAT in April, this might not be a bad time to start doing practice tests. Katie's saying, I agree with the endurance factor. My first one, I had a panic attack because I couldn't concentrate for that long. Yeah, it's real. And I'm sorry to hear about the panic attack. Better to have that panic attack in your practice than on the actual thing, right? And so that's one reason why we have you doing a ton of practice tests before the big day. We have you doing 10 to 12 of them prior so that on test day, by that point, you are acclimated to the testing experience. You've done it all before. It's nothing new. And hopefully you have reduced the anxiety around the pacing and the endurance. You've built up your muscle of concentration. And by the way, for those of you who suffer from nerves or anxiety when it comes to the LSAT, simulation is one thing to desensitize yourself to the experience. Another thing is just mindfulness meditation, focusing on your breath. Even just 5 minutes a day over the course of 3 weeks or over the course of 3 months could have a massive impact on improving your ability to focus, to control your nerves and anxiety, and that you'll be feeling better about the test and feeling more confident in your abilities. Harkenbach is asking, I'm studying for the June LSAT. How should I organize to not run out of tests for mock tests and drills? So you've got 59 numbered exams available to you in Law Hub in the new format, numbered 101 to 159. And so you just got to budget them out. Say to yourself, okay, I want to do exam 159 roughly 2 days before my actual test. I want to do exam 158 roughly 5 days before my actual test, and just count backwards from there. So then you could think to yourself, okay, well, if I'm doing 2 exams a week over the course of, say, 20 weeks, that means I'm going to start with 40 exams prior to exam 159, which is roughly, say, exam 120, meaning you might not have enough time to do exams 101 to 119, and you then don't want to touch those because you don't want to do the older exams at the expense of ever getting to the newer exams. So count backwards from test day, and then figure out where you got to start now to work through all the exams in between where you start and what test day is going to ultimately end you up at. And you could save some older exams for drilling, questions by type or doing individual sections. Do the newer exams as test day approaches, building up to the newer ones because more recent is more relevant, and the newer exams will give you a better indication of the modern LSAT and give you a more realistic depiction of where you currently stand. And feel free to book the free tutoring lesson with me through the link in my bio if you want to talk through the particulars and help you craft a better plan of attack. Justin's asking, what do I do if I got a 172, but my GPA is a 2.4? So congrats on the 172. That's a pretty solid LSAT score. Could do a lot to help compensate for the lower GPA. But of course, a 2.4 GPA is unfortunately going to be way below a lot of the medians. And so you might want to consider retaking the LSAT to get an even higher LSAT score to compensate. You could also, of course, work on your application essays and other soft factors on your application to boost your admissions odds as well. So the GPA is what it is. you can't go back in time and redo all of undergrad, or at least you shouldn't. Better to devote your time in the other areas. Josephine's asking, how long should I study for the LSAT? Well, got a question right back at you. What's your current score? What's your goal score? Where do you want to go to law school? Where you want to go to law school will help determine what your goal score might be. In my view, no reason to ever aim for anything less than a 180. In other words, aim for the highest LSAT score possible. And the lower you're starting off, the more time you might need. If you want to improve 10 points, maybe you could take it a month or two from now. If you want to improve 20 or 30 points, maybe you want to allow 3 or 4 months at minimum. It is possible to improve a lot in a short period of time, provided that you put in the work. And so if you're only able to put in 5-10 hours a week, you might want to allow 5 months. If you're able to put in 20 hours a week, you might want to knock it out in 2 to 3 months. In short, I'll give you the lawyerly answer. It depends. If you want to talk through the particulars, Josephine, you could, of course, again, book that free LSAT tutoring lesson with me, and we could talk through the specifics. Relatedly, Jesse's asking, is it possible to get a 155 if you have an LSAT practice score of 138? Can you improve from 138 to 155 by April? So 17 points in 3 months? Yes, doable. I mean, it's rare that I'm ever going to tell you that any increase is not doable, but depends on what are you willing to put in and what support do you have. If you're self-studying just with the 4 practice tests available for free and you can't spend a dime on this, it might be pretty tough. If you're able to invest in LawHub Advantage and get all the practice tests, that's going to help a lot. If you're able to invest in more guided support through private coaching or on-demand courses or semi-private coaching sessions of some kind or classes, that can also help a lot, because the thing is that when you're studying on your own, you don't know what you don't know. And so getting some expert guidance from someone who's already been there, gotten that top score themselves, it's going to make your path forward that much smoother. And so if you want to talk through what a custom plan of attack could look like to help you get the highest possible score by April, and really, if you want a 155 on test day, you want to aim for a 160 plus, because students typically drop at least a couple of points, at least 5 to 8 points. So you want to have that buffer in place. And so if you want to have at least some support, like I mentioned, I'm offering free LSAT tutoring for everybody watching this. The link is unpluggedprep.com/start, linked below this video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok as well. Open offer to everybody, free LSAT tutoring. I'm happy to talk through specifics with you and help you craft your plan of attack. Veronica says, hi, Steve. Hi, Veronica. Welcome. Happy to help. Jessica's saying, I'm in my 2nd semester of my 3rd year, but I don't think I'll be ready to take my LSAT by June. Then don't take it in June. You could take it beyond June. LSAC has not yet published the LSAT test dates for the second half of this year, but last year, for reference, they offered the LSAT 4 consecutive months. They offered it in August, September, October, and November. So if you don't think you'll be ready by June, then maybe take it in August or September. If you're in your 3rd year right now, you could take it in the fall and still apply this fall to start law school in fall 2027. So if your goal is to go directly from undergrad into law school, you're not too late. You could still take it by August or September and apply this fall to start law school 1 year from that point, and you'll be able to go direct. Ryan saying take all of them. Yeah, so I mean, I do recommend retaking the LSAT, yes. Should you take 4 consecutive LSATs? Maybe not. Might look a little bit fishy to law schools, like you're not giving each official LSAT administration due consideration. So I recommend taking it when you feel ready, when you feel like you'll be able to achieve your fullest potential on the test. So don't take it willy-nilly here and there just to see how you'll do. But I do recommend that if you're taking August as your first take, might not be bad to take September as well, because you might do better through luck alone. You do a few points higher, awesome. If not, no big deal, because law schools don't average multiple LSAT scores. They only take the highest on record. So June gives you 5 months. That could be enough time to be prepared. unless you're really busy over the next couple months. If your spring semester is busy and you won't have the time to study, of course, totally fine. If you're still in school, maybe you study hard over the summer and take it in the fall. Charlotte's asking, can you discuss any character and fitness disclosures you need to make to law schools with your applications? So there is something on your application called a character and fitness disclosure, where law schools will ask you, for example, have you ever been arrested? Have you ever been convicted? Was it for a misdemeanor? Was it for a felony? The questions will vary state by state because different state bars have different questions when you go before the bar to become an attorney. And so the questions that law schools ask are parallel or analogous to what the bar will ask. So if you've been arrested and they ask, have you been arrested? Answer forthrightly. If they ask, have you been convicted? And you've been convicted, answer that directly as well. In other words, don't fail to disclose. Don't try to hide anything. If you are dishonest, if you have a lie of omission on your application, meaning that you failed to disclose, that could come back to bite you hard later when you go before the bar, because they will check and see have you actually been arrested or convicted. And so you don't want to do anything that could problematize your admission to the bar. Now, by the way, being arrested for something, being convicted for something is not an automatic DQ. It will not automatically disqualify you from becoming an attorney. If you have underage drinking on your record, if you have a DUI on your record even. And there have been people who have committed serious violent actions, including assault, battery, even murder, who have still gotten to law school and become an attorney, believe it or not. And so whatever you may have in your history may not disqualify you, but handle it carefully. In that disclosure, explain what happened, matter of fact, don't make excuses, don't throw a pity party, don't over-explain. These statements should be pretty concise, matter of fact, tell the story of what happened, tell what you learned from it, exhibit contrition. In other words, you want to show that you are sorry for what happened, you've learned from your mistake, and nothing like that will ever happen again. Charlotte's asking, what if you've been arrested, but the charges were dismissed/expunged? I'll say this, look at the exact wording of the question. If the question's asking, have you been arrested, yes or no, and you've been arrested, even if the charges were dismissed and expunged, you still technically have been arrested. You probably haven't been convicted, of course, if the charges were dismissed, but you've still been arrested. And so look at the wording of the question. If it says arrested, you'd probably have to say yes. If it says convicted, you'd probably be able to say no. Gambino's asking, what if I was detained by ICE before? Well, being detained is not necessarily the same thing as being arrested, right? So think to the exact specifics of your situation, then answer the questions as honestly as you can. And when in doubt, if you're not sure, you should err on the side of disclosing. I doubt that any law school will penalize you for having been detained by ICE. If you're not sure, consult an attorney. Answer the questions carefully, is what I'm saying. In most cases, it will hurt you more in the long term to fail to disclose something than it will to disclose it. But the particulars matter here. So if you're not sure, talk to an attorney. You can also ask admissions directly, and they can also provide you with some guidance on this as well. Ryan's asking, do you think the LSAT is a good indicator of future success as an attorney or just law school success? So the LSAT is considered a valid and reliable admission test because it is correlated with first-year law school grades and bar passage rates. That's it. The question of whether it correlates with success as an attorney is a much shakier one. And I think that honestly, there are a lot of factors that the LSAT does not measure when it comes to being a successful attorney. People skills, networking skills, social skills. A lot of that matters a lot, and the LSAT's not really testing a whole lot related to those factors. And so I think the LSAT is probably overemphasized when it comes to admissions because it's not measuring or factoring in those considerations, which are probably more important long run when it comes to success as an attorney. I wish it didn't have as much importance as it is. I think it's a fairly imperfect measure, but for the moment, it's the best measure that we've got, unfortunately. I think I'll say this, I think that it's the best of the worst, right? Because application essays can easily be gamed between hiring admissions consultants and using AI. I think GPA is subject to rampant grade inflation. And the LSAT, of course, has its problems as well. But I think out of the various factors that law schools consider, it's probably the best of the worst that we have available. I think the LSAT plus real one-on-one human interviews would probably be better than LSAT alone. So I wish that law schools did more when it comes to interviews, because at least interviews will allow them to get some sense of your personality, your ability to establish rapport, make that human connection. Unfortunately, it's hard for law schools to do one-on-one interviews at scale. There are programs where they record you answering questions on video, but that's missing a lot of the human interaction, right? Like watching a video of somebody is not the same thing as talking to them. So I wish that they could do more when it comes to one-on-one interviews, but that's not scalable, so I doubt that they will. But for now, it's the best factor that they've got. Charlotte's asking, how can you show interest to various schools before applying, and does that help? So showing interest definitely helps, because one factor that law schools are evaluated on is their yield, meaning how many admitted students choose their school in particular. Meaning they accept you, do you say yes to their offer? That's called yield. And so they want to accept people who will say yes to them. You can demonstrate interest by touring a school, visiting the school, contacting them, asking questions, asking for an informational interview where you ask for a private meeting, where you have some nuanced researched questions. You talk with them during that call, and that will, of course, go in your file. Well worth doing for your top choices, possibly worth doing for all of them, depending on how much time you have available to invest in the process. But for the schools you want to go to, definitely worth doing. Scientology is asking, how important are letters of recommendation? Been out of school for a bit, hard to get back in touch with professors. So that's a really common issue. If you can't get from professors, get from employers, get from volunteer supervisors, get from respected members of the community who know you well. You don't need to have letters from professors, and the longer you've been out of school, the less relevant they are anyway. Just scanning through here for more questions coming in. Question, do you think working in the legal field is necessary for getting into a top 14 law school? No, there is no particular work experience that is necessary for going to a top 14 law school. It's nice to have, sure, but better to have a few more points on your LSAT than to have the work experience. In other words, don't seek out legal work experience just for the purposes of looking good for admissions. But if you have it, certainly talk about it, show it on your resume, talk about it in your application essays. Victor's asking, does applying to ABA accredited law schools make more sense right now, given the changes with Texas and Florida as well? I think that applying to ABA accredited schools still makes sense regardless of the changes, because the ABA accreditation is more portable. If you go to a school that is not ABA accredited, then you might be able to practice in that particular state, but you lack the mobility factor. And so if you want to be able to move, if life changes, circumstances change for you, then you want to be able to pick up and practice law elsewhere. And if you don't go to an ABA accredited school, you might not be able to even sit for the bar somewhere else. So I think the safest course of action is going somewhere that is ABA accredited. And those schools also, of course, have more prestige, and they have better employment rates, better bar passage rates as well. A0517 is asking, based on the increased number of LSAT takers, how much do you think GPA and LSAT medians will go up? So the numbers just keep going up more and more over time. Unfortunately, it's kind of ridiculous. They went up nearly 2 points on average on the LSAT medians. I think they went up, I forget how much exactly, but they also went up on the GP means. I don't want to speak randomly here or guess, but I talked about this recently when they came out. But basically, numbers continue to go up. GPA inflation is real. LSAT score inflation is also real. That's only going to continue. And the GPA inflation is just really more the humanities, of course, professors giving out easier A's, giving you a B pretty much just for showing up. The LSAT score inflation is due to increased LSAT retakes. It's due to the removal of logic games, making it easier to study. And it's due to the rise in LSAT accommodations, LSAC being more likely to give out extra time and extra breaks for test takers who qualify for accommodations. And so that's only going to continue. None of this appears to be going away anytime soon, and so all you can do is aim for the highest possible numbers to compensate. Keep your GPA up if you're early in undergrad. If you're later in undergrad or you've already graduated, of course, you could focus more on the LSAT. And so if you'd like my help getting the highest possible LSAT score, improving your odds of admission, getting better scholarship offers, you can feel free to book a free LSAT tutoring lesson with me. The link is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below this video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok as well. Open offer to everybody watching this now or later. And if you find these lives helpful, I do these every single weekday, same time, same place, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central, 11 Pacific, here on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, wherever you're watching this. I do these lives every single weekday. If you find these helpful, please spread the word. The only way this grows is through word of mouth. I don't do any advertising for these, and the algorithm doesn't really boost these lives because they can't run ads during them. And so please spread the word in your Discord, subreddits, Facebook groups, group chats, what have you. I really appreciate the support. I'll see you all tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, I wish you all the best and take care.